Good morning, everyone. This is day 5 of our Torres Strait trip, and today we're doing an inter-island flight from Horn Island to Saibai Island for lunch, and then returning to Horn Island in the afternoon. We decided that we'd make Saibai Island our destination for the day. The main reason was that it's only 4 kilometres from the New Guinea mainland, and it's separated by a narrow channel, and we thought it'd be kind of cool to go and stand on Australian soil and be able to look across the channel to another country. However, our flight was not without some excitement. About 10 minutes after taking off, when we were abeam Hammond Island, I had an issue. Initially, it was just a single miss, and then a minute or so later, 2 misses in quick succession. And about that point, I decided I wanted to head back to Horn Island and find out what was going on. I've had the same thing happen twice before. Once I think it was carb icing because it was fixed just by applying carb heat. And the other time when I landed and took the covers off, I found that one of the spark plug leads had lifted off the spark plug and it was still in intermittent contact. So it was just missing every now and then. However, whatever the cause was, I didn't want to be over open water for an extended period with an engine that was playing up. So I put the full carb heat on and we all turned around and went back to Horn Island. Once we landed, I took the covers off and inspected everything, and there was nothing to find. I'd had no more issues after I'd applied the carb heat, so I'm thinking it was probably early carb icing. So once I'd put all the covers back on, we departed again and headed back over the same track. It's unfortunate, but I really should be honest and raise some negative points about flying in Torres Strait. Basically, we felt like we were not wanted, except as a source of money. We accept that everything costs more in remote Australia. Cost of transport is enormous, so things do cost more. And we fly in lots of remote places, so we know that things cost more. But the Torres Strait Council and their aviation fees takes it to another level. Firstly, they made it really hard to find out what the fees were going to be. And basically then, once they do send you a bill, they refuse to accept any application for reconsideration of the costs, saying to us, it's all there in the website and you should have looked at it beforehand, so no, we're not going to consider decreasing the bill. Basically, they ignore a lot of billing conventions that you find everywhere else, having another lower tier for recreational aircraft, and they charge private and recreational aircraft as if they've got fare paying passengers and that you can then spread the cost out a bit. They billed us for things that we were advised we couldn't use, and they denied then that they had told us we couldn't use them when we tried to say, well, we weren't allowed to use the terminal and now we're paying for it. They billed an additional fee for the seats in an aircraft. So even though we paid landing fees and taking off and approach and all those sorts of fees, they also bill you for the number of seats in the aircraft, as if you had paying passengers in those seats. We had very little choice in where we were going to go, and because we went there, we then had to deal with the big costs. For anyone who is planning on going up there and wants to find the fees, it is very difficult to find, but this is what you've got to do. The URSA doesn't mention anything about what the fees are. It just says there are fees and you need to go to the website. But it doesn't tell you which website. There is a standalone Horn Island website, but there's no mention of those fees on that website. you have to go to the Torres Strait Regional Council general website, and in the general website you then have to go to the general fees and charges page. Don't go to the Horn Island Airport page in that website, because that doesn't have anything either. You've got to go and find the general fees and charges page, and now that's the one that has things like rubbish collection fees and fees to use a park or dog registration fees, all that sort of stuff. And in those pages you will find pages for each of the airports in the whole region, and then you find the Horn Island one. There's no mention at all of private and recreational aircraft. They're just treated as commercial flights. And it outlines all the fees that include things like approach and departure fees, landing fees, parking fees, overnight fees, and passenger seat numbers. So you're billed according to the number of seats that the aircraft has, even if there's no passengers in there, and even if you have no fare-paying passengers because you're private or recreational, you still are billed as if there were paying passengers in your plane. And just for completeness, at the bottom of the charges section, there is a comment that if you don't pay by the due date, there's a 7% per day penalty on top of the fees that you owe. My fees for 5 days with a 4-seat aircraft and mostly no passengers, one for 2 flights, that's it, was over $600. The first big island group we crossed over was Bardu and Moa Islands. We were originally going to land at Bardu and go to a cultural tour, but in the end it got a bit too difficult with timings, and so we just flew over. After Bardu, we crossed Marbuag Island and then headed northeast direct for Saibai. Saibai is an interesting little place, and the highest elevation is only about 1.5 metres. The island's pretty small and it's mostly mangrove swamps. The only area that's inhabited is the northwest end, where the township and the airstrip are located. As it happened, on the day that we were there was market day. As a consequence, a lot of PNG nationals come across the narrow strait in dinghies, and the guys from Border Force were in attendance with their flash new helicopter. Oh, there's that $10 million. The first thing we had to do was check in to the local council chambers and sign in. Before we even went up there, we had to get permission, and that entailed getting on the council website and giving over quite a lot of fairly intrusive details as to who we were, what we were doing up there, why we were going, and even things such as our professions. We had to put in the application. Once we got there, we had to sign in. The irony wasn't lost on us that if citizens of Saibai wanted to come to Cairns and they were told they had to get permission and sign in at the local council chambers, there would quite rightly be an outcry. Even though we were told that it was market day, it must have started pretty late in the afternoon, because there was some stalls set up, but nothing much in any of them. and there weren't very many people around. There's certainly no one trying to sell us anything. This is the Saibai Esplanade with Papua New Guinea in the background. By now it was lunchtime and we were all getting a bit hungry, and so we headed off to the local Ibis supermarket, which was the only place in town where we could get anything to eat. After we had some lunch, we worked out that there wasn't much else to see on Saibai, so we wandered back to the airport and got ourselves organised to head back to Horn Island. The trip back to Horn Island would initially take us almost south from Saibai, and then we were going to follow some of the middle group of islands before we reached Warraba, and then turn more to the west and go back to Horn Island. It's easy to see how the island is flat and low-lying. It's almost completely covered with mangrove swamps, which appear to be either constantly full of water or at least at high tide are underwater. Just after World War II in the late 1940s, Saibai endured a severe wet season and a single large king tide, and as a result of that there was a severe shortage of usable water. So most of the community was moved to the mainland on Cape York, but a small group remained behind to try to rebuild. Interestingly, the traditional leader of the community was named Bamaga Ginau, and he moved the main group and formed a community which is now named Bamaga in his honour. Apparently, some of the original inhabitants returned at later dates, but the total population of the island now is less than 400. Only a small number of the islands in the whole area are inhabited, and pretty much all of the ones that have got any significant habitation have got an airstrip. First big island we came across was Yam Island. The uninhabited Saibai Island was off to our left. Then over a string of little islets that were all uninhabited. And then on to Warraba Island, which was our turning point to head back across to Horn Island. Over Megi Kudalug and Kai Kudalug Islands, with Wednesday Island off to the right and Horn Island directly in front. and back to home base.